Okay, friends, we are into the story. Are you into it? I'm into the story. The story is on. God has created the world in Genesis chapter 1. Things have gone sideways for humans who have gone off track. How is any of this going to be made right? God's answer to that in the book of Genesis is a covenant with Abraham and Sarah and their descendants. What is a covenant? Let's remind ourselves. A covenant is a deal. It's like a two-way deal between parties where each party agrees to do something in return for something. In Hebrew, the word is berit. Berit. You can say it after me. I'll say it. Berit. Okay, that's a covenant. God offers this covenant, and this covenant has terms. For Abraham, it's offering him two very specific things that he does not have, namely land and kids. Land and kids. I mean, how hard can it be? Well, it turns out it's pretty difficult. The kids part, it turns out that all the women are infertile, or the couples are infertile, we might say, but their childbearing does come, but it's through God's miraculous intervention. So not only does God make the covenant, but then he's also responsible to really make it happen. You really get a sense that God is in control, even though humans have choices to act and interact, but God is still going to watch over the covenant. He's still going to make it happen. And by the end of the book of Genesis, they do have the kids. In fact, at the beginning of the book of Exodus, our book for today, the kids thing is not a problem. In fact, the kids become a problem only by there being too many kids. But the land, that is a big problem. Hey, we're back at the desk. Now the drama really begins, and this is something you really have to know about the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is it's near the center of the story of the Old Testament. And it's a story in the Bible that keeps on telling itself throughout the Bible and especially into the New Testament. In fact, the book of Exodus is a really, really, really important book to understand if you want to understand Jesus and the imagery around Jesus in the New Testament. We might even introduce a term here, a fancy term that you can use with your parents, at parties, wherever it is that you go. And that term is typology. Typology. Typology is an interpretive term which describes something kind of like this. There's something in the past which has features and it has certain characteristics. And then there's something in the present that is very much like the thing in the past. And its features kind of correspond mystically even, or even just in a basic literary sense, present to past, past to present across time. So for example, in the book of Exodus, when we see a character like Moses, when he is born and he's threatened immediately at birth, in the book of Matthew in the New Testament, the authors there really pick up on that typology. And Jesus is one who is also born under hard circumstances. Jesus is also has to take a trip down into Egypt, and he also is threatened at birth. Okay, that's typology. Moses is a type then of Jesus, and Jesus is a type of Moses. They communicate to each other across the years and across the page. Another really big time typology in Exodus would be this imagery around the Passover. This idea that there's a lamb, a perfect unblemished lamb that needs to be sacrificed, and that blood plays some important role in stopping the angel of death, right? So too, Jesus celebrates the Passover with his disciples in a really conspicuous way, and he is killed after that celebration of the Passover. So now we're thinking we're not just thinking of the Passover in the New Testament when Jesus has the Last Supper with his disciples as its own isolated moment. No, Jesus is actually living out the history of Israel in his own body, in his own self. If none of that makes sense to you in terms of the New Testament examples, that's okay. We're going to get there to the New Testament. I just wanted to provide a little flash forward to say these moments in Exodus are super crucial for understanding some things that are going to come up later. So what is this new situation then that we find ourselves in at the beginning of Exodus? The Hebrews, and we can call the people the Hebrews at this point. We don't really want to call them Israelites because they're not really in Israel as a formal land. We'll call them the Israelites when they get into the land in the book of Joshua. Then they're Israelites. For now, we'll just call them the Hebrews. We don't want to call them Israelis either. This is a common mistake I see students make, calling the ancient Israelites in the Bible Israelis. Israeli is a term that describes residents of the contemporary state of Israel, okay? So Israelites, after they get in the land and they get a king and all that, for now, we'll call them the Hebrews. Our Hebrews are stuck in a foreign land. They're stuck in Egypt. And they're stuck there because they had come there because of a famine in the book of Genesis. Now, though, the Egyptians are not willing to put up with them very kindly. You'll recall from the book of Genesis that it was, in fact, Joseph who had saved the Egyptians through his ingenious planning during a time of famine. Now, though, the book of Exodus tells us in chapter 1, a new king arose over Egypt, one who did not know Joseph. And this new king looks at the Israelites populating the land and worries that they will rise up and they will in fact be an enemy to Egypt in a time of war. Was there any actual indication in the text that these Hebrews would be an enemy to Egypt? Not really. I mean, I don't think I see that, but we already see the paranoid fear of the Egyptian Pharaoh. He thinks somehow there's a problem with these foreign people. And we know that there were periods, in fact, in ancient Egypt's history where ancient Egyptians had various groups of what we might call Semitic people from Southeast Asia come down into Egypt, and the Egyptians were very worried about this. In fact, those people even ruled over Egypt for a short time. They were called the Hyksos, and we know about this from Egypt's own writings. Whether those Hyksos peoples were in fact the Hebrews who were down there, I don't know that that's a clear correlation we can make, but it's at least very suggestive because we do have a biblical story where we have these people ruling over Egypt in the form of Joseph for a short time, and they do leave, which in fact the Egyptian records do talk about. It's just that the Egyptian records talk about it in a very different way and in a very different time period than we might be talking about. So that's just a little history geek kind of notes for you. But it does suggest that Egypt did have problems with foreigners kind of coming in during times of famine or otherwise, and even had tension with those groups ruling over them. So maybe there was something to the Egyptian king's fear. It's hard to say. At any rate, here's the thing to notice. That Egyptian king in chapter 1 of Exodus does not have a name. He's anonymous. Why not name him? All the Egyptian pharaohs had names. They had very clear and intricate names. Why not just name him? If you could name him, we could maybe tie it down in history a little bit better, and all of us who are history buffs like I am and archaeologists, we could go back and we could really try to situate this story historically. The author of the story seems to have a little bit of a different interest though, which is super fascinating. The Egyptian king is not named. However, that Egyptian king, as you'll know if you read Exodus chapter 1, tries to actually kill all of the Hebrew babies because he's worried about them multiplying. So they get enslaved, and there's in fact an attempt at a mass infanticide. Truly a horrible situation for God's people there in the land. And there are these two Hebrew midwives who actually, through an act of trickery, deceit, through lying to the Egyptians, actually save a lot or all of the Hebrew babies. And they get names, Shiphrah and Puah. Two of them named. Just these two common, average, everyday women. I had mentioned in one of the previous lectures in this series that the Bible is notable for the fact that it pays a lot of attention to average, ordinary people, whereas you don't see this in a lot of other ancient Near Eastern literature. And I was not just making that up. Here's another example of it right here. The symbolic value thus is clear. The Hebrew midwives who obey God's orders, who respect life, who save the children, they are named. They are respected. The Egyptian Pharaoh, the king of the known world in that place and time, he is not respected. He has no name. Okay, so Moses, where does he come into the story? Well, I'll get my Bible out here. Open it up to the book of Exodus. He's born, as I mentioned, in a very special situation. There's a threat to kill all children, but he's saved in a basket. And he grows up in Egypt, cared for by the Pharaoh's daughter. This is in Exodus chapter 2. Okay. He eventually, though, gets driven out of Egypt for committing a crime. He murders an Egyptian slave master, a taskmaster. It seems on the one hand like it's a righteous act. This slave master was beating a Hebrew slave, which seems horrible, horrific. So Moses saves him. But does he go too far by killing him? Whatever the case, he gets driven from the land. He wanders in a wilderness. He gets connected with a family. He gets married. I mean, this is really like a stunning story. And he's apparently prepared to spend his entire life just out there in the wilderness, tending the sheep of his father-in-law out there in the desert north northeast of Egypt, presumably. God really likes shepherds in the Bible. That's another kind of typology that you see. Moses is a shepherd, and King David, as we'll see later, is a shepherd. And there's a lot of sheep and shepherd imagery about Jesus and the flock and so on in the New Testament. So this typology and symbolism stuff is everywhere. The Bible's really big on symbols and repeated motifs. In a sense, you can say that the Bible keeps telling a couple of foundational stories over and over and over again. So Moses is out there. He's wandering around with his flock. This is in Exodus chapter 3. He's keeping the flock, and he sees famously a bush that is burning, lit on fire but not consumed. He turns to explore, and God speaks to him from the bush. And now Moses is like in a one-on-one conversation with God. And he says, I have heard the suffering of my people in Egypt, and I want you to go back and lead them out. And Moses is hesitant. He's cautious. He's afraid. He's like, I don't know if I'm the person for this, Am I really the person? Should I do this? What if these people come to me and they're like, who are you? Who is this God actually that has sent me to free them? God has a very strange answer, which is a very important moment in the Bible. I'm going to get my Hebrew Bible out here. Hebrew Bible, okay. To read a little bit of Hebrew for you out of here and to do a little translating. This is in Exodus chapter 3, verses 13 and following. Moses says to God, look, I'm going to come to the Israelites, and I'm going to say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they're going to say to me, what's his name? What should I tell them? What is this God's name, actually? The Bible has, for the most part, been calling this God just God, capital G-O-D, which is an English translation. Whenever you see in a Bible the translation God, capital G-O-D, it's a translation of the Hebrew word Elohim, which is more or less just a generic word which means God. Okay. What should I tell them? Moses asks, okay. God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Which seems to mean, it's not totally 100% sure what that little sentence means, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. It seems to be built off of a verb. In Hebrew, that verb is hayah, which means to be. Okay, to be present, to exist maybe even, although it's not always clear that those philosophical connotations of existence are really present in the verb. It's a complicated verb, actually. I will haya what I will haya. I will, very traditionally translated, I am what I am, or I am who I am. I am who I am. What kind of answer is that? It's almost like a non-answer. It's like, does this God not want to tell Moses who he is? And we see this dance in Scripture of revelation, God revealing himself, but also sometimes pulling back in mystery, which is such a strange dance that God has with God's people. I am who I am, or possibly I will be what I will be. In other words, you'll find out who I am. You'll find out who I am later by what happens, which is at least a little bit ominous, right? And then, okay, this is in verse 14, and then he said to him again, you shall say to the Israelites, Ehyeh has sent me to you, as if God's name is Ehyeh, which is I am, or I will be, or something like that. Then God continues in verse 15. Now we've already got two names on the table. I will be what I am. I am. And now in verse 15, and God again spoke to Moses, said, thus you shall say to the Israelites, and now the revelation of the name. We're not really sure how the name is pronounced. Oftentimes in English, it'll be written by 4 letters, Y-H-W-H, or in Hebrew, just by the letters itself. In fact, ancient Hebrew scribes had a way of writing the word or writing little vowel points around the word so that people would not try to pronounce the word. And they did that because at some point in Israelite history, the word was considered so sacred that one did not even dare to say it out loud. It was considered too powerful or too holy. And to not say the name is maybe not so much a superstition as it is a sign of reverence for all that God is and all of God's holiness and all of God's specialness. Christians have not usually had any kind of problem with saying the name, and we think the name might have been pronounced something like Yahweh, but it's not really clear that that's what it is, but we think maybe it is. So God eventually then does, in verse 15, finally now, after 2 steps, reveal this name. You will say to them, Yahweh, or in English, often it'll just be written in English Bibles, the Lord, with Lord being in all capital letters. The Lord has sent you to set you free, and thus the name is revealed. So now we've got the leader. God is not going to let Moses back out. He says, I'm not eloquent enough. I don't know what I'm doing. God, the Lord is not going to take no for an answer from his new chosen prophet, from Moses. He's going to send him back there to Egypt. And back to Egypt he goes. But not before a very bizarre incident. And this comes up right after this revelation that happens. Moses is to go back, and there's this bizarre thing where it's like God then comes to kill Moses. He confronts him and is going to actually kill him. Wait, I thought you just sent him back there to release the Israelites. Now you're going to kill him? Again, we see this mystery, this revelation, but then this pulling back, this sense of comfort and safety and of salvation from slavery, but also this almost dark sense of danger that this God is not to be trifled with. So Moses arrives in Egypt. Do you think this Pharaoh's just going to let the people go? He has a bunch of slaves doing work for him, building bricks and doing all kinds of stuff. We know that the Egyptians employed large groups of slaves to do things like build the pyramids, for example, right? Not the same time period. By the way, just a little historical fact, the pyramids were built long before the Israelites would have been there if we want to see this story historically, so we wouldn't want to connect it with that. But the idea that the Egyptians had big monumental projects for which they employed slaves is something we definitely do know historically, okay? So we can kind of begin to approach this story historically in certain ways, although we might not always get down to every specific detail like one might want. But we keep searching, we keep doing archaeology, we keep studying, we keep learning. It's good stuff. Is Pharaoh going to let them go though? No. No, he's not going to let them go. Now, why doesn't he let them go? Presumably for his own selfish reasons. I mean, Pharaoh is not portrayed in a positive light in this story. This story is very biased. It definitely has a perspective. Pharaoh is wrong. Typology, right? The Pharaoh is the foreign oppressor. And this story of a foreign oppressor who hurts Israel is a story that the Bible will tell, in fact, over and over again. First, it's the Egyptians, but later it will be the Assyrians. And then later it will be the Babylonians, and then it will be the Greeks, and then it will be the Romans. To the point where this typology of Pharaoh is a really powerful typology for thinking about release from slavery and about liberation in any area, even in the lives of people of faith today, who can think about who is Pharaoh or what, maybe better, like what kinds of situations in our lives feel like slavery, feel like wrong and unjust rule, wrong rulership. And really what we're about to get into now is a competition of the gods. In the Egyptian religious system of the ancient world, Pharaoh was a god. He was an embodied form of the god on earth. So if that god has God's people, Israel's gods, the true God's people, and he's treating them like slaves, but Israel's God is looking down, he's like, hey, wait, those are my kids. I'm not going to let this happen. I don't know if any of you out there are parents, but we have to try to start to get into the emotional logic of a story like this. We may not be able to get all the way into the ethical logic of a story like this, because the ethical logic can get pretty dark. If you read this story, you'll notice that at various points, we're told that Pharaoh hardens his heart. He says, no, I will not let the people go. But then at other points, we're told that God, in fact, hardens Pharaoh's heart. And there's a kind of alternating pattern of Pharaoh doing it and God doing it. I don't know that it's that helpful to see the pattern and find some mystical significance in first, Pharaoh hardens his heart and then God does, and so God's just reacting to Pharaoh. I mean, it's still pretty dark either way. God prevents Pharaoh from saying yes, from releasing the people. And there's an ethical conundrum there. Like, how can God punish people for something that he, in fact, has set up all along? And there are ways you can think about it. You could say, well, maybe God's not actually punishing him for refusing to let the people go, but rather the hardening of the heart itself is part of the punishment for enslaving the people prior. But really what God's doing is setting up this massive drama to inflict the most possible harm on Egypt and to show that Pharaoh, who has claimed to be God, is in fact no God at all. And that is the drama, the competition, God versus God. Who's the real God? That's another story that will tell itself in the Bible over and over again. The emotional logic, I'm a father of 2 young daughters. Maybe I can get into it a little bit if I think about that. Like, what if I saw someone take my daughters and enslave them and hurt them? Is there literally anything? Is there any extreme end to which I would not go to set them free, to come back and claim them as my own? No, I can tell you right now, I would want to say for myself as a Christian that I'm a pacifist, that I could turn the other cheek, but I'm afraid of what I would do, if my children were being harmed. And in fact, this language of parent and children is the exact language God uses to talk about the Hebrews in Egypt in the chapter on the Passover, Exodus chapter 12. Israel is my son. You enslave my son, and now you're going to pay. So it's very, very emotional, okay? So I don't know if that helps overcome the ethical problem of the hardening of the heart that happens with these plagues. I mean, insects, frogs, darkness, hail, eventually the death of every firstborn child in Egypt. But the stakes are very strong when God says, Israel is my firstborn. You did this to my firstborn, this is what I'm going to do to you. It may be that if you're a person of faith, or even if you're looking at faith from the outside, it may be that you look at a picture of God like that and you're just like, whoa, like, really? Like, isn't God better than that ethically? Does it really have to be murder for murder, harm for harm? I don't know. I can't answer for that. But I can answer for the story itself as it presents itself. God comes out swinging, and he comes out triumphant. Egypt is utterly destroyed. Maybe you can't get into the ethics of it, or maybe it'll just take some time to continue thinking about it. And that's not a question I want to try to solve for you. But you can get into the emotional logic of it. And the story, I think, invites us into that emotional logic. Israel is God's firstborn son. The plagues are all very fascinating. They're spectacular, they're interesting. But this last plague, the death of the firstborn child, is the hardest. This is in Exodus chapter 12. I'll read here from the book of Exodus. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you." God is now reorienting time itself for Israel. He's telling Israel, today is New Year's Day. Today is the day you go free. All time is now oriented around this event. They take blood from a lamb that they sacrifice and they put it on their doorposts. And everyone who does not have the blood on their door in Egypt, every family with a firstborn son, the child dies. I mean, this is just brutal. And there is weeping and wailing in Egypt as Israel goes free. Again, you have to think like, the weeping and wailing of a long time in slavery versus the weeping and wailing of this terrible, terrible night. It's a tragic story no matter how you read it, right? The blood goes on the door. I mean, just the symbolism itself. Can you imagine taking blood? Have you ever seen an animal get killed before and seen blood come out? I grew up in rural Wisconsin in a deer hunting culture. I don't really hunt now, but when I was young, I was around a lot of this kind of stuff, and just seeing an animal bleed. I mean, it's just so visceral, and the guts and just everything that's involved. The idea of smearing blood on a doorpost. It's just so tactile. The smell, the feel of it. And Israel goes free. This event, though, that Israel does, this is the basis for the Jewish holiday of Passover. Maybe you've been part of a church group, or maybe you're even part of a Jewish community that has celebrated Passover, the actual feast itself. Part of the feast itself, though, has you saying an order of events, retelling the story, various kinds of things. This is called a seder in Hebrew, or an order of the service. And part of that order of the service has the participants repeating some of the words from Exodus chapter 12. And these words have a child asking the parent, why are we celebrating like this? And how does the parent answer? The parent answers, and I paraphrase, it was on this night that God set me free from Egypt. Set me free. You answer in the first person, just like that first generation of Hebrews did there in slavery. The Exodus story itself is not just about people in the past. For Christian readers, indeed also for Jewish readers, the story of the Exodus is about now. It's a story that keeps retelling itself. And it's not just a story of just purely spiritual freedom, as though you kind of get free in your heart, but then nothing else. It's a story of actually getting out of slavery. I mean, imagine just for a minute, take an imaginative leap with me. Imagine if the story were different. Imagine if the story were like this. Moses comes back from the desert and comes to the Hebrews, and he says, Hebrews, gather around, I have a message for you. And they're like, okay. And they come close. And he says, oh, Hebrew slaves, your God has spoken to me in the desert. And they're like, oh, this is great. And Moses says, your God has spoken to me in the desert, and he has declared that he has come to set you free in your hearts. Kind of like, no, you will remain in slavery. You stay. Oh, did you think we were going to come out of slavery? No, we're not going to come out. You stay in slavery, but no, it's like in here. You undergo an inner transformation, and then you remain a slave, but it'll be like you'll be saved inside your heart, right? I mean, how would that be as an Exodus story, right? That is not the story at all, not even remotely like the story. The whole power and point of this story is that Israel actually gets out, right? I don't mean to denigrate or make fun of the idea that there's in the life of it for Christians that there's some sense that we are healed or saved or transformed inside of ourselves. We might say in our hearts or in our minds. For me as a little kid, it was really important, I know in church, like to, respond to a preacher's message, to get saved, to like pray a certain prayer and to invite Jesus into my heart. And that language continues to be really important to me. So I'm not dismissing that. But on the terms of the book of Exodus, right? You got to actually get out. You got to actually leave. The victory that God wins is an actual, real victory. It's not just a moral victory. It's not an abstract victory. It's people actually leaving Egypt. And they definitely do leave. So Israel does leave. And they cross the Red Sea. Traditionally, the Red Sea, probably a better translation is the Reed Sea, Yam Suf in Hebrew, the Sea of Reeds. And they cross over, the waters part. I mean, this is so cinematic. This is so epic. This is so Titanic. The waters part, they go across, but the waters come back on the Egyptians. Israel is now free. Exodus chapter 15 then has a song that Israel sings. It's called the Song of the Sea or the Song of Moses or sometimes even the Song of Miriam. Sometimes it's called the Song of Miriam because Miriam is one of the leaders who leads Israel in worship. So we even see a little insight into the gender dynamics of leadership in ancient Israel. Miriam leads Israel in song. Exodus chapter 15:20. The prophet Miriam, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and dancing. And she sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea." Linguists who study the Hebrew language have noted that this chapter, this poem in Exodus chapter 15, actually contains very archaic language. It's like you're reading narrative, and then it's like you lapse back into Shakespeare, if you thought of it on analogy with English. So this poem seems to contain perhaps some genuinely very, very, very ancient language, a very old song rooted in Israel's experience of actually getting out of slavery, of crossing the sea and facing an unknown future. Where are they going, though? That's the question. Well, it turns out they're going to a mountain.